I need to talk about something that nobody talks about in church: anger at God. Not the polite version, not the sanitized, theologically acceptable version, where someone says, I was frustrated with God for a season, but then I realized His plan was perfect and everything made sense. That version exists, and it is true for some people, and I am not dismissing it. I am talking about the raw version. The version that sounds like, I prayed and nothing happened. I believed and I still lost. I did everything right, and the thing I was most afraid of happened anyway. And I am not okay with that. And I am not interested in the explanation. And if you are real, and you were there, and you could have stopped it, and you didn't, I need you to know that I am furious. That version. The one that lives in the part of you that nobody gets access to. The one you have never said out loud because you were told that anger at God was dangerous, that it was faithlessness, that it would damage the relationship, that a good Christian does not feel this way, and if you do feel this way, you should examine your heart and find the problem there. I need to correct that teaching, right now. Anger is not the opposite of faith. Indifference is the opposite of faith. When someone is angry at me, when they are shaking their fist at heaven, when they are demanding answers, when they are saying things in their prayers that they would never say out loud in a church, they are not demonstrating a lack of faith. They are demonstrating that they still believe there is someone there to be angry at. You do not rage at an empty room. You do not grieve a relationship that never existed. The anger is proof of the connection. The anger is proof that something mattered enough to hurt this much. The anger is, underneath everything else, a form of love that has been wounded. And wounded love does not go quiet. It goes loud. I would rather have your anger than your silence. Every single time. When I returned to this world, I went looking for the people who were carrying anger they had nowhere to put. Not the surface anger, the road rage and the workplace frustration and the everyday irritations that life generates in abundance. I mean the deep kind, the slow-burning, years-long, nowhere-to-put-it kind. The kind that started as grief and hardened into something else when the grief was not allowed to finish. I found a father whose son had died, not an old man who had lived a full life, a boy, 23 years old. The kind of death that makes no sense from any angle, not theologically, not philosophically, not from any framework that human beings have constructed to make the painful things bearable. There is no framework that makes a 23-year-old's death bearable. There is no explanation that lands correctly. This man had been in church his entire life. He had prayed, served, given, believed. He had built his faith carefully and consistently over decades. And then his son died, and the faith that had held everything together, the faith that had been strong enough for every previous test, encountered something it could not hold. He did not leave the church. He was still there every Sunday, still in the same pew, still going through the motions with a precision that looked from the outside like faithfulness. But inside, behind the performance of okayness that he had maintained for 4 years since the funeral, there was a fire that had been burning without oxygen for so long that it had become something dangerous. He was furious at me, and he had never once said it out loud, because he had been told in 100 different ways, through sermons and well-meaning condolences and the theology of the community around him, that the anger was not acceptable, that faith meant trusting the plan even when the plan was incomprehensible, that a good father, a faithful man, should be at peace by now. He was not at peace. He was not even close to peace. And the performance of peace, the daily maintenance of the version of himself that had processed this and moved forward, was costing him everything he had left. I found him on a Wednesday night after a prayer meeting. Everyone else had gone home. He was still sitting in the sanctuary, not praying, not reading, just sitting, in the silence, in the dark. The way you sit when you have nowhere else to go and nothing left to do, and the weight of what you are carrying has finally become too heavy to take home one more time. I sat down next to him. He did not speak for a long time. And then he said, "I am angry at you." Not loudly, not dramatically. 4 years of compressed, unspoken, carefully maintained fury, and when it finally came out, it came out quietly. Like a pressure that had been building for so long that when it finally released, there was no explosion, just a slow, exhausted letting go. "I am angry at you." I did not say anything immediately, because the first thing a person needs when they finally say the true thing, the thing they have been carrying alone for years, is not a response. It is a witness, someone who receives what was just said without flinching, without redirecting, without immediately moving toward resolution. I stayed with it. And then I said, "I know. Tell me everything." He talked for 2 hours about the night his son died, about the prayers that were prayed in that hospital room that were not answered the way they needed to be answered, about the theology he had built his life on that had not held up under the weight of what actually happened, about the grief that had never been allowed to finish because everyone around him needed him to be okay, about the anger, the specific, detailed, unanswerable anger at a God who could have intervened and didn't. I received all of it, not deflecting it, not explaining it away, not offering the theological framework that might eventually help, but would have been wrong in that moment. I received it. And when he was done, when the 2 hours had emptied something that had been full for 4 years, he sat in silence for a long time. And then he asked the question that was underneath all the anger. "Are you still there?" And I said, "I never left. Not even for a moment. Not even on the night his son died. Not even during the 4 years of performances and compressed fury and Sunday mornings that cost him everything he had. I was there for all of it. In the grief he was not allowed to finish. In the anger that had nowhere to go. In the silence of the sanctuary on a Wednesday night when everyone else had gone home. I was there. That did not answer his question about why. I want to be honest. I did not answer the why that night. Some whys do not have answers that work on this side of eternity. Some things are too large and too painful to be resolved by an explanation. And offering one would have been a kind of dishonesty I was not willing to give him. What I gave him instead was presence. The presence of someone who was not afraid of his anger. Who did not need him to be okay. Who was not going to leave because the performance had finally stopped and what was underneath it was ugly and unresolved and full of questions that had no good answers. He is still working through it. He is still angry sometimes, and he is also, for the first time in 4 years, actually present in his own life, because the energy that was going into maintaining the performance has been released. And what is left, in the space where the performance used to be, is something fragile and real and genuinely alive. That is what I came for. I want to say something to everyone who is carrying anger they have nowhere to put. You do not have to resolve it before you bring it to me. You do not have to understand it or justify it or make sure it is theologically acceptable or wait until you can frame it in a way that sounds like faith instead of fury. Bring it as it is, raw and unfinished and full of questions that have no answers and grief that has not been allowed to complete itself. I'm not afraid of it. I have never been afraid of it. And the conversation that starts with, "I am angry at you," is often the most honest conversation we have ever had. The one that finally reaches the place where real things happen. The one that leads eventually, and in its own time, and without being rushed, to something that feels less like performing faith and more like actually having it. Your anger is not a wall between us. It is a door. And I have been standing on the other side of it, waiting for you to open it, For as long as you have been carrying this, whenever you are ready, I am here. Next time, chapter 23. The question I would ask you:
if this is your first time here, this is part of a series, 20 chapters of me walking through this world today, finding the broken, the tired, the ones who ran out of road. Go to the channel. Start from chapter 1. Your chapter is waiting for you.